AI will not come as a big bang. It's a decade-long journey for us to come.
Hi, my name is Christian von Essen, and this is Heja Framtiden, the Swedish podcast on the future. How is artificial intelligence transforming different industries, and how is it affecting our daily lives? In today's episode, we will meet the Australian-German AI expert Christian Guttmann, who's been working with these issues for 25 years. Heja Framtiden is, as always, produced in collaboration with Warp Institute, who's trying to make the future come sooner. Warp Institute is currently initiating the first private asteroid mission and crowdfunding it so you can be part of this historic moment. Read more at warpspaceprogram.org to join this interesting and fascinating revolution. We also collaborate with the Swedish business magazine Veckans Affärer, and we've recorded a podcast at Helio, providing Stockholm with 7 different locations for co-working and flexible office space. Check out helioworks.se. Please follow us on social media, Heja Framtiden, and read more about our amazing interviews at hejaframtiden.se. We have almost a dozen English episodes out at the moment, so check them out. If you like what you hear, you can always donate a few dollars each week to help us become even better at what we do and help us improve our platform. Check out patreon.com/hejaframtiden. All right, let's get to it. Let's continue the discussion about artificial intelligence. Now let's listen to the amazing Christian Guttmann. Welcome to Heja Framtiden, the Swedish podcast on the future, in English this time, and we welcome Christian Guttmann.
Hello.
Australian German.
Correct, yes. And also, sometimes refer to as honorary Swede because I've been living here for a while and speak Swedish and so on. So, yes.
Yeah, there's a lot to say about your resume, but you are now Vice President, Global Head of AI and Data Science at Tieto, the consultancy company, Finnish-Swedish consultancy.
Yes, roots are in Finland, Sweden, and the Nordics, and it's also a software company, so software consultancy for sure, yeah.
Executive Director of Nordic AI Institute,
correct.
Which you founded as well.
Yep. It's a non-profit organization of a global alliance of leaders in AI, in industry and in research. Yeah.
Associate Professor at AI at UNSW Sydney, Australia University.
Yeah.
Research Fellow at Karolinska in Stockholm.
Yep.
Entrepreneur, investor, speaker. A PhD in AI as well.
Yep, exactly.
You've been working with IBM in Australia. You've been working with BT in United Arab Emirates. You have a master's from KTH in Stockholm.
Yes.
In AI as well.
Yeah.
Bachelor in Social Sciences at Stockholm University. Was that descriptive enough?
I think it's a reflection of my passion and my dedication to the topic of AI, So I guess over the last 25 years or so, I have been so interested in really developing this topic. And for example, one of the things that I did early on is to also study psychology. So a way of understanding how we humans make decisions and how we behave as a basis for building intelligent machines. And I think that's when you go back to the field of AI, many of the initial driving forces and key figures have actually a psychology background, and started formalizing those, behaviors into mathematics. And that often is then a basis for engineers and computer scientists to turn this into an intelligent machine, actually.
So you must have noticed early on that this was a topic that would be exploding in the future. And now everything sort of correlated into this perfect storm of AI development.
Absolutely, and I feel sometimes it's quite amazing because if you think about it, it has been a bit of an inside discipline, an inside industry, right? And now it's everywhere. So we have so few people right now that have been taking this AI seriously for long that it's quite amazing to now see it growing out of these, let's say, nerdy, more scientific roots into the mainstream. Everyone talks about it, and now it's almost flipping to the other side, where before fewer people talked about it and knew even the term around it, and now we have many people and everyone talking about it. It becomes very fluffy, let's say. You need to really be careful about which sources you listen to and who actually has understood the topic. But yeah, you're completely right. Like it turned a lot, and also, I mean, I remember when I was working in the different industries that you mentioned earlier, that it was actually not so sexy to talk about AI. It was a topic that you were, let's say, it had a bit of a funny connotation, right? So there were many other words that were used, like intelligent systems or big data or analytics and so on. But now it's exactly what it is and what it has sort of always been for perhaps 70 years or so.
And what is your role at Tieto?
Yeah, so at Tieto, you can probably divide my role and responsibilities in 2 or 3 areas, and that's certainly not covering it all, but one is it's the strategic consideration. For a large company, a large Nordic company, you need to start looking at how you position yourself in this future market or in this emerging market, so that there's a lot of questions of what capabilities you need and how you actually offer and articulate your offerings to the customers and what partners you're seeking. That's one part. The other one is, of course, building all this AI. So the AI architectures, the AI use cases and the technology. So that's what we are focusing a lot on. So just as a quick example, last year we have developed perhaps 50 different AI components and technologies which can be deployed to many different industries, including healthcare and finance and so on. And so these are sort of the 2 main roles, I would say, at the moment. And then, of course, supporting the business and the ecosystem overall.
Okay, and so the technologies, are they commissioned by clients, or are they sometimes developed just for future needs?
Yeah, for future, it's both. It's both. I think in a market that doesn't completely exist yet, so the AI industry and the AI market is really something that emerges. So therefore, it's not as clear-cut as selling something that has always existed and you start competing, with many others. It's really starting to find those niche areas which then become bigger for the company such as Tieto and for the entire industry. I think when I'm now speaking to many partners and also competitors in the Nordics and in Europe, it is something that we need to create as a marketplace. So before we start competing heavily in these markets, we also need to contribute in creating the right framework to compete properly.
And which industry areas are most in the forefront when it comes to AI?
So I mean, there's something behind the question, right? When you're asking which areas are in the forefront, as of today in Sweden and in the Nordics, then there are some, like for example in telecom, big companies like Ericsson, for example, and Telia and so on. There's a lot happening. Also Volvo looking at how they are building self-driving cars. These are areas which are sort of established but if the question is in part related to what are the potential, where are we going, then I'm seeing a lot of opportunities, first of all, in practically all industries, because AI is a multi-purpose technology, just like electricity or the internet was. So everything will be affected. But some of the areas that we are focusing on is, for example, the whole public sector. So it is certainly healthcare and well-being, education. These are areas. And we have recently when you look back at what we have communicated to the public, we had a few very nice cases with the traffic authorities in Finland, for example, with the municipalities here in Sweden recently about education and school children and so on. So we have been using AI there. Another sector is, of course, banking, so finance and insurances, for example. So this is a big sector which will be influenced. And perhaps a third one, which is IoT, predictive maintenance. So as you have machinery and things, you would like to know, how long, what is the life cycle, what is the expectation of these machines to work properly and so on. So these are some examples. And then there are many others like, oil and gas and retail is another big sector. So all of them will be very heavily affected. It is, though, very hard to say precisely how much they will be affected and how quick the adoption rate is in some of these markets.
But do you think the average person will notice these changes?
Yeah, they say the best technologies are the ones that you don't notice, right? So I think it is like with so many things, like it's going to be a transition. I said in previous interviews also, AI is not going to come as a big bang that suddenly, next year all cars will be self-driving and you will have a robot that follows you to school or something. I mean, this is unlikely to happen. So it is sort of a silent revolution, really. It will be improving many of the technologies that we are used to today in an iterative way. So if you take any industry, let's say self-driving cars, right? I mean, already today, if you buy the latest Volvo or Mercedes or BMW, it has many autonomous features, right? So it follows the lane, it wakes the driver up and so on. And so those are small things that you will iteratively see moving into these types of products and services. And I think this will be a natural evolution. And another area would be healthcare, for example, medicine, where we have where one of the first areas which we won't feel directly, not at least objectively and visually, will be on how you do a diagnosis, how you make sense of a lot of data, like in images and MRIs and in X-rays, which today is done by a person, but that can be done very much by a machine, by an AI, to detect abnormalities, and this would then be indirectly reflected as something where you receive a better diagnosis and a faster diagnosis, from the doctor. So if you look carefully, you will see these types of changes,
It's like Försäkringskassan, the Swedish, what do you call it? Welfare system.
Social, what is it called? Social system.
I was home with my son like 2 weeks ago, and they have cut out one of the steps in applying. So you don't have to apply before, you just apply afterwards. You say, it was Thursday, it was Friday, I was home full days, and then I signed it with my bank ID, and 1 minute later I had confirmation that I had applied, and the next minute I had confirmation that I had been it had been granted. The money is on their way, and that was not the case 10 years ago.
Right, exactly.
It's a lot of papers and
yes,
months of waiting.
Yes, I gave a few talks on how the interaction between the government and government entities and the citizens can improve and has already improved in some places in the world, like for example in Singapore, where essentially when you have these requests like the one that you mentioned now, right, and there's so many, as you know, Skatteverket, Socialstyrelsen, and many different government entities with whom you need to connect and talk to and fill out applications and so on. In Singapore is now a chatbot which essentially collects and connects to all these back-end, let's say, services, and you can have a dialogue with that chatbot, and it points you into the right direction. Whereas today, as you know, right, you go to the Skatteverk website, you go to the Socialstyrelsen website, Försäkringskassan, so there are many different ones. But this is a way to communicate your needs and in part even to fill out many of these forms and automate those types of processes. So it means you have increased service quality, you have more transparency in the process if you design the systems correctly. And also a very important part that I find that I'm very passionate about, and I've been working in for a long time, is of course the ethics and AI and ethics. And I know you had previous speakers on the topic. That's certainly something that at Tieto we are one of the few that have this AI certificate in place and then AI guidelines. And what it means, or one aspect of it is, I mean, it democratizes the ability for you to apply. So let's put it this way. If we keep the system the way it is, and as it was maybe 10 years ago, where it's very cumbersome and you have to fill out many forms and it can take you a very long time. I mean, this is something where some people that are more, let's say, that are in a better position or don't have any needs towards the social welfare system, they don't see these administrative efforts, the costs, and by costs I don't mean money, but the costs of time involved in applying for these services. And when you have these systems which make this interaction easier, you also allow people that are in need or that, that essentially, let's say, became unemployed or have needs with children and so on, they have easy access to these services. They're not bogged down in filling out forms, like waiting for decisions to be made. It can be a pretty smooth process, therefore allowing not only those in society that are affluent to continue striving, but also those that may need support from society in order to go up. So this is something where AI and these new technologies really allow everyone to participate and give everyone equal opportunity to be part of this process and part of in society.
What was the AI certification you mentioned?
So, I mean, once you have, so at Tier 2, we introduced the AI ethics guidelines. That is for us to take a proactive step in terms of, building our AI in ways that it makes decisions which are fair, where in many cases the decisions need to be transparent. Not always, by the way, but in many cases. And in order to do that properly, we have introduced at this point an awareness program for those working closely with AI at Tier 2 that go through this certificate. So they go through, at the moment, a reasonably short course, if you like, and a questionnaire, which give them a strong sense of what's involved. What does that actually mean? And
like a checklist.
Yeah, like a checklist, and it refers to many of these efforts that have been initiated in the world. For example, of the IEEE, talk to John Havens, for example, who's the chairman at IEEE, which is a large international organization for engineers, where you look at the design of systems so that they become fair. And that is something which is a topic in my AI team and at Tier 2 very often. So in other words, for example, recently we have decided to change quite a few algorithms towards them being ethically, let's say, aligned best practice. And I want to highlight, some people might say, but why does a company make these types of ethical decisions for society? That's not the idea. I want to sleep at night. I said that last year, right? So I want to make sure that my team is doing the things as right as they can. And as it becomes a law in the future and a regulation, we will, of course, take that on board. And we have, of course, in the EU, in Brussels now, many discussions of how such a framework would look like. And that would be something I'm looking forward to implementing.
Yeah, that's where Fredrik Heinz, for example, is involved in.
Correct.
And we met briefly at the inauguration of AI Sustainability Center in Stockholm a few weeks ago. Mm-hmm. Where Anna Fellender, another interview person here, has initiated. Do you think that sort of effort is important in bridging the gap between programmers and ethical decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. I think and there are many efforts now. Like I think over the last 3 or 4 years, there have been many initiatives around the world. There's the AI Now Institute, Max Tegmark, who is also originally a Swede, who is at the MIT, has been creating the Asimov principles, which could be followed, and there's quite a few. So there's absolutely a need for this type of ethical design, if you like. This is also not new to Tier 2. A good colleague of mine, Simon Kavanagh, who is living in Norway and works for Tier 2, has been building these principles for some years and many different other concepts. But let's put it this way. And the UN, by the way, is also working on that. And a good colleague, Professor Wayne Wopke from UNSW, has been working with the UN and creating these frameworks and, for example, looking at how data is used for humanity. Not just for let's say, commercial purposes, but, how can it help us to eradicate disease and those types of things. So it's very necessary. The structure needs to be worked out in more detail. And then in the end of the day, I also say often that there should be a sort of a minimum viable ethics. So something that becomes practical because it's not that we will all agree what the right ethics is at some point. In a recent paper of a good colleague, Iyad Rahwan, also at the MIT, that's something I recommend people to read. It was a Nature article 2 months ago published that describes that the decisions that different countries and cultures make are actually quite different. So if you're living in Singapore or in China, you have preferences in terms of, for example, who might be injured in a car accident, right? As opposed to Sweden or Germany or America or Brazil. So there is not, at the moment, it doesn't look like there's like the one ethics that rules it all, if you like, So, but at the same time, we also don't want to be stopping the development of AI, if we need to first wait for the final decision on AI ethics. It will be evolving all the time.
But do you think is there possible to create legislation around this globally?
Yeah, I think.
Whereas EU creating one legislation and US another.
So legislation is like one part of the story. I think it will, at this point, it should be more guideline, because legislation will only be part of, it's generally considered a guideline in general. Is it possible to have a global guideline on ethics? So I think if such a thing is possible, it will take a very long time, because it would require a very homogenic understanding of how we're looking at the world and life principles. And then also it will only always be a representation, hopefully actually, of a big group of people, because you will individually and should individually always differ, I think, on your views on how ethics are working. So I think it will differ. And then perhaps, and this is now I'm thinking out aloud, but it would then also mean that people could possibly choose which products and services to buy based on which ethical principles, perhaps, right? It's a little bit, this is, again, maybe a bit of a stretch, but as you're now buying products in coffee, which is fair trade, right? It's a choice that you make as a consumer. Perhaps it's something similar that might happen in the AI world, A fair trade AI system.
Maybe. Do you think the Nordics can use this sustainable AI to gain recognition internationally?
Yes, so I think it is certainly a contribution. It will be part of the future. I think, and also with the AI Sustainability Institute with Anna, I think this is a very good step forward. I had many colleagues around the world reaching out. So I think, can we be leading in this? We could, if it becomes a very international effort. So it would really require internationally to be representative and almost on the level of the UN type functionality and role, right? So that would require a lot of expansion over the years coming. But in principle, it's absolutely a need to look at that approach. It also would need to be quite pragmatic and practical, I think, for it to really grip and to be part of companies and systems and so on.
You mentioned AI in education and schools. And there's one interesting case recently from Skellefteå at Anderstorp School, where you helped them install facial recognition in the classroom. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was used. Frederica Ling and a really good crew at Tieto worked on this, and essentially, the bottom line is that when teachers use a lot of time noticing the attendance of their students, right? They come in and then you have to ask who is in the room and so on, and that takes time, is incomplete, and so
you actually said in the press release that there were 17,280 hours of logging each year.
Yeah. So it's
sounds crazy.
It seems like a very big number.
But 1,250 students, and maybe they have 6 or 7 classes each day.
Yeah.
And each person would have to be logged every time.
Exactly. And so this, exactly right. So this is just one of those examples where you think, like, is it truly necessary? And the primary competence and responsibility of a teacher to do these types of activities, right? To what extent could this be automated? And this is exactly what happens. So the face recognition system, the only thing it did pretty much is to notice when someone enters the room, and therefore, there's also videos on the net. If you see that there's a little green blip that says that you have come in and you're in the class. Yeah, that's essentially what has been implemented, and very well received by the municipality as well as by the schools that participated. So I think this is one of those examples where teachers in general probably are quite happy to focus on the things that they are much more passionate about, which is to teach children and students what, the content of the course.
Has there been any concerns, integrity-wise?
Yes, so we certainly had huge discussions internally, like to make sure everything is in line. And it's a very limited domain, and there's no functionality that is in there that would do anything else than what we just discussed. So in that sense, it's no major concern as it is in terms of integrity or privacy. But we keep a very close eye on these type of technologies and how and if we expand those in the future.
Are people rightfully skeptical towards AI, or are they a bit too afraid of discussing this?
So I think many people are skeptical and afraid, and I think this is a very healthy attitude, as it is with many new technologies that come in. So I think all of us, including myself, so I might sound like someone that is very much promoting AI being the solution for everything, but believe me, I mean, I have very much on the other side of this coin, I'm thinking a lot about how it influences us. And the last few years, AI has become such a core of so many things that it is very hard to keep up with everything that happens. So I'm certainly now at a point where I need to make sure I understand enough of everything. And it depends a little bit how rational your fears are, right? I mean, what is it that you are concerned about? I would certainly encourage everyone to speak up and share. Also reflect and try to articulate as good as you can the question and the concern that you have. Do the research and see what you can already find out, because that will be a good basis to address that concern. Is it a rational concern or is it an irrational concern? I mean, one of the things, as I mentioned earlier and alluded to earlier, is that AI will not come as a big bang. It's a decade-long journey for us to come. So take self-driving cars. They won't be all on the street next year. It will already just take time, at least 15 years, for all the models that are designed now to even come out in 8 years' time. And these are not self-driving cars, right? So there will be a slow change in this. But at the same time, one has to be very clear that, and this is where our governments need to respond and really think about it, is 450 million people in the world are involved in moving things or people from A to B. 450 million is a very large number. And that means people are in taxis, transporting goods and so on. And many of these types of jobs are likely not going to exist in the same format in 15 years' time. And so we have some time to start thinking about this, but it will certainly, if you don't do anything, it will certainly very heavily affect certain industries. And so that is one of those things we need to start thinking about now. It's not like dead urgent, but it's certainly something that will become a bigger and bigger topic.
And is that something you discuss in the Nordic AI Institute as well? The job situation going forward?
Absolutely.
Is there a solution to that? You can also argue that the jobs will not disappear immediately. As you say, it's a long transition, but the roles within the profession will change. And do you think that can be met with more education or competence raising initiatives, stuff like that?
So maybe first to the point about the Nordic AI Institute. Yes, we have lots of discussion. It's a global alliance, and many of the people that are the fellows of the Nordic AI Institute, which is an independent non-profit organization, right, that looks at strategy, and we are supporting governments. So I myself and many in the team have discussions with ministers and prime ministers in the world, in India and many other places. We have regular discussions because there are relatively few people in the world now that are on that level, and we face very similar situations with, for example, governments or leaders. And it is, for me at least, extremely helpful to have this network, because we can exchange how these discussions have been, right, where governments are and so on. And so that's certainly very good. And then, with that said, I have now really developed a good international awareness how these challenges differ in different countries in the world. So, for example, India and China will have very different challenges when it comes to the future of work. And now addressing your second point as to what needs to change, because those countries will be affected very heavily, much heavier than Europe in the first phase, because many of the jobs are much more repetitive and they have to do with, work which can be automated, if you like, and replaced. And then to the point of, how does it change the future of work? I mean, you have two responses, essentially. You can think of it as in two ways. One is that technology has always been something that initially makes quite a difference, and one refers also to this as the Industrial Revolution. And we can then utilize it, and it will create more jobs, unleashing, values and capabilities that we have, which are which are more creative, which are things that machines cannot do, right? So that's one way to look at that, and that's one likely scenario. The other scenario is that, for example, this will be such a fundamental change, that many of the jobs that we have today, which give us essentially all the basic utilities that we apply today, we just don't need to do these types of jobs anymore. But we have all the goods that we need in order to live. So in that situation, there's all these discussions about having some very different type of economic system and how we are, how we're living under that. So, for example, like having a standard income and so on, experiments that were run in Finland, for example. But these are sort of the two big scenarios, that are probably unfolding. And then to the point of how should we evolve or change the teaching. It was in fact the Alibaba CEO. What's his name again?
Jack Ma.
Jack Ma, exactly. He I like his thinking. He's also referring to the fact that you need to look at all the things that machines will not be so good at in the next decades ideally, and that's around creativity. It's about caring for others. It's about teamwork and empathy and those types of things. That doesn't mean that machines may never be able to be part of those types of tasks and capabilities, but at least not in the next few decades. And that is something we should start looking closer at. Because one thing is relatively certain, you will not be able to compete with a machine when it comes to sheer data processing and repetitive tasks. I mean, that is something that this is pretty clear, you won't be able to be good at that, let's say. So we will not be out-competing machines in that. And I could give you hundreds of cases where that's already the case today, and hundreds of cases which will unfold this year and next year.
You mentioned AI in the healthcare and medicine sector. And when it comes to personal health, how do you think it will help us there?
So, as you know, I probably have been active in healthcare and medicine for the last 10, 15 years or so, worked quite closely with general practitioners, with authorities in different places in the world. And so personally, I really hope much more changes. I mean, with great respect to the profession, they often have no influence, no negative influence about how the system works. But the experience that you have in terms of receiving a healthcare service is not so good if you compare that with many other services. When you, for example, book a meeting, you have to wait, you have to find slots and then sit in the waiting room, and then you have 50 minutes with the doctor. All this is really not so optimal. And I think everyone will agree that is nowhere near as optimal as many other services that you receive. So that's one part, the actual processes and how you can, make them quicker, more convenient. The other part is that all the data that's created about you as an individual, the biometric data, your information, your microbiome, your DNA, the comparison of you as a patient compared to the millions of other patients which might be similar to you, all this type of information today is not utilized and turned into something that can enable a doctor or the healthcare system in general to give you a better service, to give you a faster diagnosis and better treatments. And there's a lot of effort now in many different parts of this industry to include these types of AI services into it. Like if you take it pharmaceuticals, it has to do, for example, with finding the right persons for the clinical trials. That's one big topic. If you look at the healthcare services that I mentioned earlier, it's about looking at the pathology units. How can they shorten the process from the time you present yourself with certain symptoms to the time where you actually receive a diagnosis? And that's critical in some cases. You cannot wait 30 or 60 days to get a diagnosis as to whether you have a cancer or not. It should be within 3 or 4 days, not 30 days. And so IT and AI in particular can help with that. I'm looking forward to those things. So I feel, for me, it's so obvious and transparent that the benefits that could be unleashed in the sector are huge. And at the same time, I also respect very much the rigor with which the scientific discipline has to assess that. Particularly in medicine, it's done through very rigorous double-blind trials, any changes that come in, but the speed at which we do that is far too slow. And here, just a comment now, today, we have the Swedish government is now in place, and this is a task in part for the government to decide that the frame, under which we deploy these services, medical services, into the system needs to be faster. The frame needs to be set correctly.
There's also the task of integrating different systems into a major system, and also the personal integrity aspect of it is. I mean, why would I care about my medical data? Use it as much as you like in the entire system.
Yes.
My address is online. Anyone can come find me and murder me if they like. But my blood values or my medical history is really, really hidden in some drawer somewhere in a doctor's office. I think it's counterproductive.
Yeah, I agree. And this is, by the way, reflective of a very healthy Nordic and Swedish attitude, which I like very much.
Maybe.
I think in some sense it is, because when I travel back to Australia, for example, other places, and I show them our 1177, right, the app and the way how you can now log in, which is sort of driven in part by Daniel Förslund, right? You can access your diagnoses and the values and so on, as you probably have tried. And I showed this to some of my colleagues in the US and Australia, and they were just like, how is that possible? I mean, because they were immediately jumping to the question, well, are you not concerned about giving, isn't it a very, very private piece of your life? You would never want to give that to anyone. But what you said now is I think it's a very good attitude, because there is certainly some medical information which you may not wish to broadcast, right? But from my personal view, I agree with you. Like, much of that data can and should be used for the purpose of delivering you better service than everyone else, right? So I think it could be reasonably easy fixed, let's say, by asking people, as we have according to the GDPR in Europe now, by asking you to what extent this type of data could be used for those types of purposes, to make it very transparent to you and to unleash the potential and the benefits. So I think it's not so easy as I make it out now, but it's certainly quite possible and should be considered very seriously.
So what are you looking forward to in this field in the future?
Yeah, so I mean, AI is the future, right? So there's so much to look forward to. So much. We touched on some of the things to look at what we have already starting to happening now in the healthcare system, right? To start really having more tools and more services which are more personalized and tailored, and the whole experience that you have with the healthcare system is much smoother, and I'm sure that will happen. So that is something I'm certainly looking forward to. The many other technologies which are deployed now when it comes to, like for example, food. I give in some of my lectures also a presentation about a robot now that's a kitchen robot, and it does all these different foods automatically and cleans up the kitchen. So it actually, those types of technologies, I will be one of the early adopters of those types of technologies. There will also be more around the self-driving cars. So again, I will be one of those probably that will be buying those cars, right? And be quite happily sitting in them and sipping a coffee while I, look outside. So there's many technological changes that will happen. But I'm also looking forward to, I think, freeing and democratizing this whole our humanity in some sense, because we are now still stuck in many of these very tedious tasks and painful tasks and risky tasks that we do every day across the globe. And I think many of them will be freed up with this type of technology. So we can focus on things that are really important to us and very valuable to us. So that is something I generally look forward to.
And what is your best tip for making the world a better place?
One of those easy questions, eh? Well, making the world a better place. I think when it comes now from the angle of AI and technology, as you know, and I think everyone is aware of it, there's no question that it will be more and more part of our world. And I think what's very important is for more and more people to understand this technology. And I know it's not so easy because by and large it requires mathematical skills and engineering skills, and the influence on today's life is already so large with elections. We have had so many examples now where you can very easily influence like people's behavior through all these social media sites and so on. So I would hope that we can really find a good balance between the progress of this technology and how it is actually managed in a way that it will contribute to our humanity. So I'm not quite answering the question. So I'm still thinking.
Do you have any reading tips on the subject?
Yeah, look, there's a lot. It depends a little bit what you want to achieve. When people ask me, what shall I read, right? How shall I educate myself? It's a little bit the question, what do you like to achieve, right? Where do you want to be after you read this? Is it that you want to become generally more aware of what's possible in this space? Then, you will probably find reading many of the articles that you will have on Harvard Business Review or, on some of the IEEE sites and so on. I also encourage everyone, by the way, to look at my LinkedIn and Twitter account. I'm sort of sharing every day several good articles that I'm reading. So that's one where you're up to date all the time. But if you want to be more technically and get really technical and understand what's possible, then Norvig and Russell, AI, a modern introduction, is an absolute must read, which has been the standard book, if you like, for the introduction of AI scientists over the last perhaps 30 years. Another one, when it comes to a bit more business application, I would suggest the book Prediction Economy. That's a very key book by thinking of how predictions, which is a very economic concept, can make a difference in different industries and will be a major driver in this AI industry. So these are maybe two books. And if you're interested in psychology and neurobiology, there's a number of interesting books by Reichardt, for example. So that's neurobiology and artificial neural networks. This is not just talking about deep learning systems, which are so known today with these neural networks, but it goes back to how our brain is structured and how our neurons are working, and going all the way towards building these artificial neural networks, for example. So that's another good one which influenced me.
Who do you think we should interview?
Yes. In the world, or?
Yeah.
There is people that I really find quite inspiring is, for example, Anand Rao. He is in Boston. He is the global head of AI at PwC. He has very good insights when it comes to enterprise AI. Another good colleague of mine, good friend, Iyad Rahwan, he's professor at the MIT. He's working with, among so many topics, but one is moral machines and also the question of ethics. Kate Larson, we had a good discussion when we were both talking in Oslo a few months ago. She is looking at the relationship between robots and AI and humans, and how we as humans, she reflects on how we are forming a relationship with AIs and robots. So she's a great candidate. And perhaps Milind Tambe, he's also professor at the University of South Carolina. So and then perhaps Wayne Wopke, he's at UNSW, and he might come to Stockholm soon. So it would be really good to have a chat with him, because he's working with the UN and looks at those types of aspects.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Christian Guttmann, for visiting Heja Framtiden. Find everything you need about him at LinkedIn.
Yes, there's a fair bit there. Yeah,
and at Tieto.
Indeed.
.com.
Yeah, and the Nordic AI Institute also. It's Nordic AI Institute, all one word, and then .com.
Okay, great. Everything you need to know about Heja Framtiden can be found at hejaframtiden.se. Thank you so much for listening.